Leech Seed is an awesome move. It's so great because you are playing offense while on defense, and that is the best way to play defense. As much as it can sometimes be the best choice to just completely sit on your opponent and wait for them to collapse, defense is so much more efficient when it plays like an offensive team, but with bulky Pokemon and more indirect forms of damage. So think about it like if you have a bunch of hazards up, then using a phasing move is actually a pretty strong offensive attack, and you can damage two Pokemon in the same turn. Yeah, isn't that amazing? So Leech Seed is an extension of that principle. And so it has found a lot of uses on all sorts of teams ever since, well, not so much Gen 1, for reasons we're about to get into. Not to say that Leech Seed can't be used to very annoying effect on more offensive teams, of course. But even when you are running a more offensive team, then you are slowing the game down with Leech. If you're trying to win the game, in a very short period of time, Leech Seed is generally not the way to do it. I guess you could conceivably think of something that would be a very fast-paced team or Pokemon that would use Leech Seed to improve a certain matchup against a certain Pokemon, but otherwise you would play very quickly. And this is just the voices in my head that make me explain everything very, very precisely. Conceivably you could, but most of the time that's not going to be the case. Most of the time, even offensive teams that are running Leech Seed will have the ability or the capacity to slip into a slower kind of game state for a little bit. Mostly bulky offense. But, if you want to be super precise, then you could say, in DPPOU, for example, you could run a 3-attack Shaman that runs Leech Seed as its last move because that lets it get past Spadef Jirachi or Blissey, even though it's still playing at an otherwise, very fast pace. And even that Shaman, I don't really see. And I guess you could run that on a very offensive team. Theoretically, anyway, and it is, but most of the time you are not going to be doing that. But it's good to keep in mind that possibility, just so you don't limit yourself. If you've got an offensive team, a very fast-paced offensive team with that kind of Shaman, and you're like, I'm getting bothered by things like, Bronzong and Latias, but I want to run 3-attack Shaman. What if I pop Leech Seed on it? So I get all the benefits of fast-paced Shaman, but if need be, then I can Leech Seed those pokes and not really miss a beat. However, most of the time, Leech Seed is a sign of defense even on, even very aggressive sub-seed Pokemon, let's say. Like Shaman Sky, for example, which nobody would mistake for a slow-paced Pokemon. But its best weapon, I guess depending on how you feel about Scarf Healing Wish, but one of its best weapons at the very least is sub-seeding, in Gen 4 and 5 Ubers. It's an absolute terror with those. So even that is a fast pace, but rather than get wrapped up in the minutia of the details of the definitions, that should not take away from the greater point that's being made. I say all that just to keep in mind the possibilities. So hopefully I've covered everything to the satisfaction of the things screaming at me in my head. So Leech Seed, not very good in Gen 1 because I don't know why it says 1/8 on Showdown in the RBY Team Builder, because it's 1/16 and it's not very good. Now there are cool uses of Leech in RBY. The biggest thing that's unique to Gen 1 is that Leech Seed stacks with Toxic, so that is potentially really, really nasty. But Toxic itself is kind of, I don't want to say gimmicky, but generally it is going to be on the niche side. So theoretically you can see some use of that. In practice you're really not going to. Although you could definitely use Leech Exeggutor to help out with something like Amnesia Slowbro, for example. So theoretically, but you don't really see it much. Also because Leech Seed does not activate on the switch. That's the biggest thing. So it's like, you Leech Seeded into the Starmie, and it doesn't even activate on the switch, and it only does 6.25 per turn, which is generally not too much of a too useful of a move slot. And if you're just going to thud into other Exeggutor, yeah, it's just generally a very niche move, so you're not going to see it in Gen 1 very much. Although, it could have some uses for sure. But yeah, niche. Gen 2. So Gen 2, Leech has that same thing where it doesn't activate on the switch, but it is a little more viable. First of all, it does do 12.5%. So there's that. And second of all, you can pair it with spikes. So the thing about Leech Seed in Gen 2 isn't about spamming it at every opportunity, because this is famously the generation of rest and sleep talk, so games are long, and 16 PP will run out very quickly. So what you really want to use Leech Seed for, if you have to use it to slow down like a cursing Snorlax or a Vaporeon, then sure, that's one thing. But most of the time, what you're going to be using Leech Seed for is kind of an auxiliary thing, kind of as a supplementary move to the other stuff you're going to be doing with it, with your Pokemon, which is going to be Exeggutor pretty much. Meganium, feasibly, but again, very niche. The problem with Meganium is that it doesn't do much outside of Leech Seed. And Leech Seed is good, but it's also not hard to outlast. So what Leech Seed's biggest strength is, now in RBY, if you Leech Seed something and it just switches out to avoid being Leech Seeded, then it's not such a big deal. Now in GSC, with spikes, you can force switches more. Okay, you can't just purely go off of passive damage because it's just not strong enough. But what you can do is you Leech Seed something, like let's say Zapdos switches into your Eggy and gets Leech Seeded. And okay, now suddenly Zapdos loses this one-on-one, so Zapdos is going to switch out, and that lets you set up a switch to your Machamp or whatever. And that gets you the opportunity to get Machamp in as you know Zapdos is not going to stay in. As just one example. So it's not about Leech Seed, wearing everything down and healing you safely, in the same way that we know Leech Seed to function Gen 3 and onwards. It's one of the most spammable moves, and it wears things down easily. And no, here you have to really be more careful with it, or you will just run out of PP very quickly. Like, even if Celebi were in OU, like it used to be a very long time ago, if you just ran around Leech Seeding everything, like even just disregarding for a second the possibility that you just thud with your Leech Seed into another Celebi. Like, that's really not what it's there for. It's there as a necessary way to dissuade something like Curslax or Growth Vaporeon or what have you from running through your team. But it's also there to set up switches, and really it's there to force your own offense by setting up that situation. And it takes a lot of foresight to make the most of, and thus it's not very popular. It's not very automatic. It's not very just plug in and spam it and it kind of figures itself out. Because a lot of the popular strategies, they do kind of play themselves to a certain extent. It's like, oh, you get your spikes and you spam Thunder with Zapdos. Yeah, Leech Seed is not quite that same kind of thing, where you use it for support for something like Belly Drum Snorlax, for instance, where first of all, the extra little recovery, if you can manage it, is nice, but most of the time people are going to be switching out of that Leech Seed. Now, of course, with spikes, then you will not be able to switch around the Leech Seed forever if your opponent is also applying pressure from other directions. If Leech Seed is the only offense they can muster, or Leech Seed plus spikes, then yeah, it's not going to be much of a problem. But if it is Leech, and on top of something else, like Eggy is already a good Pokemon, but if you have Leech Seed as well, then, like for example, one set that had a brief flash of popularity a few years ago, it didn't really take off because it doesn't have Explosion, which is, of course, one of the most incredible moves in the early generations. But what this Eggy does so well is it supports slow sweepers like your Machamps, your Marowaks, your Rhydons, even like feasibly like mixed attackers like Tyranitar. And of course, it's really good for certain kinds of Snorlax as well. So what this set does is make sure that you can spread paralysis and you can muscle your way through matchups in a way that would otherwise be very difficult. For example, against something like Zapdos, it's tougher for Eggy to do that. I mean, with Thief, then yes, you can potentially do it if you land that Thief. And even then, it's not always going to be easy to muscle your way through Zapdos without getting the boom off, or without being forced into a boom, because HP Ice hits you so hard, and, you step on spikes, and it can be very messy. So, Skarmory is another example. There you have to start slotting in Hidden Power Fire for coverage, and it can just be not the most fun thing to deal with in the world. So, with Leech, you are managing to muscle your way through Zapdos and Skarmory, who are two of Eggy's biggest natural enemies, and you are able to actually threaten Snorlax, in a one-on-one much more effectively, because you get so much health back from Leech because Snorlax has such a huge HP stat, and you can have Egg stick around and spread more chip damage and paralysis, and that is what it's really trying to do. Spread chip damage and paralysis. Leech Seed is not the main weapon. It's a way to help it get that chip and para, which will in turn support your slow, big, heavy hitter. And another way of thinking about it that I think Borat used to talk about was that, in more modern generations, we kind of think of Leech Seed and Explosion as these kind of antithetical moves. Leech Seed is for Pokemon that stick around, and Explosion is obviously the opposite of that. But, just like a Snorlax set could feasibly run both Rest and Self-Destruct, then, you shouldn't be closed-minded about that, because, especially if your opponent is going to switch off to the possibility of Explosion once they see Leech Seed, then you can take advantage of that. But also, it's not necessarily the most antithetical thing, because it's nice with Leech Seed, obviously, but if you're trying to get more out of Eggy, because yes, Leech Seed helps you be more forceful, but sometimes you also need that immediate just burst of Explosion, so you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. And if you can do, Leech, Boom, Psychic Stun Spore, then I think that set would be very, very successful right now. So I would recommend that. And Leech is one of the... It's underexplored for sure, because, again, not intuitive, has its problems, but yeah, you're going to pretty much see Eggy. If you play Ubers, then, Celebi does similar things. And then once in a while you will see Meganium. But sometimes Meganium doesn't even run Leech Seed and runs Swords Dance. Okay, so Gen 3, Eggy sucks, unfortunately. I mean, okay, yes, it has its niche, but it's not going to be Leech Seeding, I'll tell you that. And instead, Celebi comes around and starts leeching everything. And now Leech, it works on the Switch the way we all know it today. And so it becomes a big deal. When I first got into Advance in early 2011, let me tell you, Leech Celebi was so popular. It was absolutely everywhere. Some people were saying, if your team doesn't have Celebi, it's not a good team. And those players were generally not, the advanced veterans, but it certainly felt like that, because it felt like Leech Seed was such a good weapon that you had to have your own Celebi just to block your opponent's Celebi from leeching into your team safely. So I can understand where that sentiment came from. In the set that was popular back then. And I made this video recently about Ostamatitos versus Undisputed in SPL, whatever it was, 2018. And Asta used this very old Celebi set, which is very, very nasty. Leech, Calm Mind, Psychic, Recover. And again, it's a great example that of a Pokemon that doesn't entirely rely on Leech Seed. Like, yes, early on, your big threat is going to be Leech Seed because it's very spammable now. But you have to be able to threaten with more than just that. And I mean, a lot of sets will drop Calm Mind for HP Grass, for example, so you're threatening with both stabs. Calm Mind lets you boost. There's all sorts of ways to do it. Right now, the most popular Celebi set for a while has been Leech Seed 3 attacks. Leech, Giga, Psychic, HP Fire, with a lot of special attack investment. So that's an example of a very fast-paced Celebi set. But, even though that set is fast-paced, it's still on teams that are bulkier offense in stature, as opposed to some the hyper-offensive styles of teams, which don't have time for Leech because they're just setting up and Calm Minding and Swords Dancing and Dragon Dancing and all that stuff. So, but that's an example of fast-paced but still bulky. But yeah, so Leech Seed is now super powerful, not just because it works on the Switch, but because there's permanent sand and there's multiple layers of spikes, up to 3. So now, more than ever, especially when you're pairing it with things like no more sleep talk calling rest, so it's harder to do that, and Will-O-Wisp being thrown around, and like an improved Toxic as well, then you have all this passive damage flying around, and Leech Seed is a big part of that. Now, the game does still definitely slow down sometimes, and you can't just spam Leech Seed forever and win. The time Leech Seed is most effective at doing its whole offense while playing defense thing is when you're playing against offensive teams who are not much in the way of longevity, and you want to wear them down while keeping yourself healthy. That's the ideal place for Leech Seed. Otherwise, if the opposing team does have longevity, then yeah, you're going to annoy that Wish-Jirachi or whatever it is a little bit, but you're going to need to apply pressure more elsewhere to get the most out of it. And that's another reason why I think Leech Seed is such a fun, fascinating move, because you can't just spam it freely. I mean, there are going to be cases where you click Leech Seed to win, and it is that easy. And you'll see people building these teams, and you're just like, how do you switch into Leech Seed of all moves? And they don't, and they just pray they don't face Ferrothorn or whatever it is. But yeah, most of the time to get the most out of Leech Seed, you do have to really engage with the game, and that's the kind of Pokemon that I like. So yeah, Celebi is blocking its own Leech Seed a lot, but that's another reason why Invest HP Fire is so popular and so effective. So yeah, in addition to that, you're obviously pairing with T-Tar and Skarm, and then you've got your fast cleanup Pokemon like Aerodactyl. Like, oh, I've Leech Seeded the entire team. If only I had something fast to pick up the pieces. Oh wait, here comes Aerodactyl. Or, oh wait, here comes Gengar. And now, with the greater spamability of Leech Seed, then you also have the possibility of keeping your own team healthy. So especially if you can land a Leech Seed on a Blissey and just get full health on whatever it is. I mean, there's so many ways to use Leech Seed on Celebi. You can use it on Swords Dance Pass, pretend like you're not running SD for a while. And even if they do know that you're running SD, it's still such a great move. Or you can run Calm Mind, Leech, Giga Drain, Psychic, which is a huge pain for so many balanced teams. So it's great on defense, it's great on offense. And there are other ways to use Leech Seed. For example, Breloom has a very nasty sub-seed set because, of course, you have that big fighting stab which rips through so many of the tier staples, and it has sleep. So what's particularly nasty about this, and it doesn't have to run Focus Punch, you can run Sky Uppercut for more consistent stab, or you can run Mach Punch, which I think is very underrated. But either way, you max the speed on this thing, and you just are absolutely devilish. Some people even Agility Pass to this for maximum irritation. But yeah, Breloom's low HP stat is actually to its benefit because it lets it create more substitutes with Leech Seed. So, and again, this is not going to do all the work for you because you do only have 16 Leech Seeds. So you bring this out at the opportune time, at the end of the game where their options are more limited and they can't afford to stall out your 16 Leech Seeds, especially if you're pummeling them with Focus Punch, and you time your sleep well. And yeah, some people even drop their HP IV down to certain levels to make it even easier, because you're not trying to take hits with this Breloom, to make it even easier for you to create more subs and get more health back from Leech Seed. Celebi, you don't want to do that. Celebi's bulk is too important. The way you do that on Celebi would be to invest in its defenses as opposed to its HP. So you still have bulk, but you don't get more health back from Leech Seed. But you would never, drop Celebi's HP stat. That's horrifying. If anything, substitute Leech Seed Celebi, which is a great set I somehow overlooked. That one is phenomenal because it also sets up 101 HP subs, which you get them Baton Pass in the face of Seismic Tossing Blissey, and you get Metagross in for free. Oh, it's beautiful. So, and Leech Seed obviously is a great set there. Sub Leech Recover Baton Pass. Yes, no attacks. It's a phenomenal set. And you can take advantage of other grass types because you have Subpass. Anyway, so yeah, this Breloom set is monstrous, and I'm sure there are other ways of using Leech Seed, but this is definitely its most consistent. And there's also Venusaur, which it's a great Pokemon if you hit Sleep Powder. That's the problem. That if you hit Sleep Powder, it's great, and if you don't, then you just hate yourself. My favorite Venusaur is on Scar Mag teams because then you don't have to worry about HP Fire or anything like that. and you can run Sludge Bomb, specifically so you have a stab move that hits Celebi. And that lets you Leech Seed more efficiently. And you also have the combination of a high percentage poison rate to go alongside your Leech Seed. So then your last move slot can be like Roar, or Giga Drain, HP Grass, whatever you want. Roar Venusaur is actually very, very irritating, so I'll give a shout out to that. Hey, I didn't even know Venusaur learned Light Screen. That's probably a pretty good choice. You can throw that on. You can do whatever you like, really. But yeah, Venusaur, very, very underrated. Or, you know, Sleep Powder willing. Leech Seed misses. People will often say, like, oh, come on, it's just a Leech Seed miss. But Leech Seed is such a powerful move that, you know, if I have an offensive Pokemon and I'm dodging Leech Seed, I am thanking Arceus above, because that is a blessing. Leech Seed is such an amazing move because even though it doesn't outright counter things, it helps you play around things so much more reliably, you know, which is why it goes so well with Protect or, you know, switching around resistances, things like that. And in fact, one of the great underrated Leech strategies is to run Leech Celebi alongside Substitute Magneton, and this lets you semi-reliably beat Metagross without losing a Pokemon to its boom. You know, without necessarily protecting on it or switching to Gengar, which is risky. No, you Leech Seed it with Celebi, and then it helps if your Celebi also has Sub. But then you switch to Magneton on what feels like a relatively riskless Meteor Mash, right? And then you just start subbing down with Magneton, which is faster. And the Metagross can EQ as many times as it wants. It will be worn down by Leech Seed. And Magneton is obviously getting a ton of health back from it, so you're never going to risk running out of subs before Leech Seed puts Metagross in T-Bolt range. And if it blows up on the sub, I mean, let it. That's the same result. So, if anything, it should just keep EQing more to make you waste more subs. But it's kind of a moot point, because overall, the point is that it lets you safely trap Metagross, which is otherwise very difficult to do without losing a Pokemon. So, yeah, Leech, obviously got to be careful because Gen 3 also introduces pressure. So if you Leech Seed into Rest Zapdos, for example, which will love, you know, draining 2 of your Leech Seeds, then you better be making some use of it. You know, and it's very easy to just click Leech Seed, oh, let me see what happens, but you got to be careful because late game, if you have a lot of Leech Seeds left, that can be so big. And, you know, running the opponent out of Leech Seeds is one of the most common ways that, you know, Leech Celebi usually is dealt with. So, okay, so Gen 4, there's Stealth Rock and higher power, so now Leech Seed is used even more. But Leech Seed actually used to be very, very popular, and it used to be on Celebi mostly, you know, Leech, Grass Knot, because it hit T-Tar and Gyarados very hard. And Giga Drain, it's a much better alternative to Giga Drain. Don't use Giga Drain in DPP, it's very bad. Before it got buffed in Gen 5, Giga Drain was only used in Gens 2 and 3 out of a lack of a better option. But in Gen 4, you have Grass Knot or Leaf Storm, but don't use Giga Drain in DPP, it sucks. So, this, you know, Leech, GK, HP Fire Recover on Bold Celebi, I mean, that's a 2009 classic right there. And so it was, you know, either that or T-Wave over Leech Seed. But yeah, Leech Seed was one of the most spammable moves for the same reason, because there's not that many grass types in OU. And one of the most popular grass types, Breloom, you know, Celebi actually counters it. It's one of the hardest counters there is. You know, Roserade actually had so many great moves to use, it wound up not even using Leech Seed. First of all, it's illegal with Sleep Powder and Leaf Storm. And Toxic Spikes Roserade with Sleep, T-Spikes, Leaf Storm, that doesn't have the moveset space for Leech Seed, even though it would like it, but it's illegal anyway. And I thought Spike's Leech Seed sets, which are illegal together, those can't run Leaf Storm. Spike's is illegal with Sleep Powder and Leaf Storm in Gen 4, sadly. But I always thought Leech Seed was underrated on those because it would be Spikes, GK, HP Fire again, and then Rest to go with Natural Cure, or Stun Spore just to be irritating and catch like a Dragonite or something switching in. But I like Leech Seed there, you know, like you could do silly things. Like I remember I had a game once where I used my Spikes Roserade with Leech Seed to check an Agility Empoleon as it was setting up. You know, not that Stun Spore wouldn't have done it anyway, but, you know, I like Leech Seed there just because it also does that whole offense while on defense thing where it heals Roserade and it heals your teammates, and that's always good because, you know, power creep, and you're trying to keep up with these really big hitters, And, sometimes a big Specs Heatran, for example, yeah, it is going to be neutered by Stun Spore, but it's still going to be hitting hard. And it's much easier to switch your Tyranitar into a Specs Heatran, for example, if the T-Tar is also getting health back because of Leech Seed. Obviously forcing more switches is also very good. So I liked it on Spike's raid. But generally it was Celebi. And sometimes Breloom as well. The same exact set. Sub, Leech Seed, Spore, Focus Punch. That's the classic with an impish nature. And then post-Dragons, post-Latias and Salamence, then Shaman became very popular. Is it OU by technicality now? Yeah, it is. And Shaman became very popular. And sometimes it was 3 attacks rest with Life Orb. And Scarf eventually became popular. But the most consistent set was always Leech Protect, Seed Flare, HP Fire, or Ice. I always thought Fire was more effective on Leech Seed, just because it's... What was my reasoning, actually? Because you're hitting other grasses. I think hitting Steels, I think, was more important, than the Dragons. Because the Dragons are also vulnerable to things like Dragonite in particular is vulnerable to rocks and sand, whereas Flygon is getting Seed Flared. I think that was probably it. You can Seed Flare, or Kingdra, for example, and Dragonite is getting worn down by passive damage, but the Steels are more resilient, so you want to be hitting them harder with HP Fire. And, you don't want to be going with Earth Power for Heatran, because you're Leech Seeding Heatran anyway. I mean, you Leech Seed... Here's how powerful Leech Protect is. Leech into a Heatran with Rocks Up, and then Protect, and, if it's... Even if it is lefties, then it's getting worn down irritatingly, but a lot of them weren't. And suddenly, they're on a very fast-ticking timer. So the set was great. It was really good against the stall teams that were popular back then. Because, if your answer to special attackers is Blissey, then you just get leeched on. And obviously, Natural Cure means you can't just, Toxic the problem and make it go away. And this went very well with Toxic Spikes, this set. But it's, even without Toxic Spikes, it was just a good way. I mean, you had to be careful of opposing T-Spikes, which is a trap that a lot of Leech Protect Shaman teams fell into. They're like, oh, Leech Protect Shaman will beat stall for me, and then the Fortress would lay Toxic Spikes, or the Nidoqueen, which was getting popular, and like, oh, never mind. But if you're smart about that, then it was a great... It was also tough to fit T-Spikes on a Shaman team. That's another reason why Nidoqueen became popular, because you don't want to run Roserade Shaman. I mean, you could, theoretically, but that's very, very specific. So most of the time you wouldn't. And, Fortress Shaman was fairly popular, but I never thought those teams were super consistent. They were okay, but definitely like the Nidoqueen option more, because those 4A teams wound up being way too scared of things like Tyranitar of all sorts. So, yeah, but either way, Shaman was very good. And Tentacruel, I like Tentacruel, but, it's fairly niche in that regard. So even Venusaur was actually quite popular for a time among better players in DPP. Because, again, Sleep and Leech, and you say, oh, what about Breloom? Well, Venusaur, first of all, it takes on special attackers like Shaman, and it takes on special attackers such as Shaman, and it takes on special attackers in a way Shaman does as well, like taking on electric types. Which Spadef Shaman was used for a while because it could be fast. I liked Fast Shaman the most because it dealt with offensive Suicune, which is a major pain. But Spadef Calm Shaman was good too. And you would take special attacks like Shaman would, like Roserade would, sometimes even like Celebi would, and you absorb T-Spikes, and that was really, really big. And it helped you deal with stall. So, Venusaur, why can't I find in the team builder? I'm not going low enough. Yeah, it's all the way at the bottom of UU. So yeah, you would run Black Sludge on it. Obviously, you have the whole awesome trick punishing thing, whether it's from Rotom or Scarf Jirachi, which was popular. So yeah, Leech, Leaf Storm, because it hits hard, not Magical Leaf. And then Sludge Bomb or HP Fire, either's fine. It was a very popular Pokemon for some time. It went very well with Milotic, actually. Just recreating UU and OU post-Dragons. So the problem with all these Leech Pokemon is that eventually, you did have things like Spadef Grasses being used on stall teams, specifically because they helped do things like absorb T-Spikes in the case of Rose or Venusaur, or, for the case of all of them, block Leech Seed. And they obviously did a lot of other things, like deal with Breloom, which was also becoming very popular post-Dragons. Like Celebi was very popular on some stall teams for that reason. And because, T-Spikes were big, then people would select Venusaur or Roserade. Because Breloom was big, then people would select, Celebi or Venusaur, because Roserade doesn't do so well with the physical defense side of things. And sometimes you would actually have trouble fitting in Shaman if you were trying to check everything. But Shaman was such a threat of its own right that it was kind of like Keldeo in Gen 5 in that sense. But, yeah, then Clefable pops up, and I have a whole video on that, so I won't bother talking about how it knocked Leech Seed out of the metagame entirely. So now, if you want to run Leech Seed in DPP, you got to run it on a Pokemon that actually threatens Clefable. And one way I thought of doing that I still like on paper, even though I haven't tested it much in practice, is using Venusaur because it has Sleep Powder, first of all, and it also has Knockoff. So even if Venusaur, or if Clefable comes in, you can knock it off, and then you can pressure it more with Sludge Bombs and Leaf Storms, especially if you run Modest on it, so you're actually hitting it very hard. You have to be very careful because, your Venusaur gets knocked off, then you're toast, but I think it does have potential. But the easier way of running it is people started experimenting with a lot of Breloom sets that didn't run Spore in general, and some of them would even include Leech Seed with Protect, and you could run Leech Seed, Protect, Facade, Spore. I know I said without Spore, but Spore could be used there. No fighting move? Yeah, actually. Or you could run Sky Uppercut. Or it definitely wasn't Drain Punch, because Drain Punch is just as bad as Giga Drain because of low PP. But yeah, you run Sky Uppercut, unless I'm forgetting something very obvious, but it's definitely better than Brick Break. Yeah, you could run something like this, Sky Uppercut. I even like Toxic on it, so you mess with things like Gliscor, trying to stall you out. Oh, Force Palm, that's what I'm forgetting, because of the paralysis. Yeah, and it's got good PP. You could run Sky Uppercut if you want, of course, but Force Palm is what I'm thinking of, because it also messes with things like Gliscor. Toxic, Spore, whatever you like. You could run Sub, you could run Mach Punch. There's a million things you could do, point being. And yeah, so this is the way to do Leech Seed in modern DPP post Clefable, because first of all, you're leeching, pretty much everything else, and it's a great move in general. And you also have Stab Fight for Clefable, and once your Toxic Orb is activated, you are not afraid of Knockoff. So you are not walking on eggshells around it. It's a shame because a lot of teams, post Clefable that became popular were just walked over by Shaman, but you would never want to run Shaman because it was so bad into Clef. I mean, yeah, Seed Flare, Spit F Drop, whatever. It's going to switch out and reset it, and other Pokemon can deal with it too. It's just not enough. So you wouldn't want to handicap yourself like that. And you wouldn't even run it for Healing Wish because Latios is back, so it's a shame. But yeah, that's Gen 4. Now Gen 5 also went through a similar thing. Not with Leech Seed Breloom, although I gotta say, with Buff Drain Punch, then Spidef Breloom was very popular. It was a set invented by Sweepage and then popularized by Brofist. Late Black and White 1, early Black and White 2, and I was a big fan of it because you could do things like lead off against Genesect safely. You weren't afraid of Scald, Broken Scald. Once your Toxic Orb was activated, you were very good against Rain. You leeched everything, you protected, you had Broken Sleep. It was an amazing Pokemon. And problem, it was a grass type that didn't check check Keldeo, but hey, neither was Ferrothorn. So yeah, it was really good on several types of teams, bulky teams like Bulky Starmie alongside Skarmory, Hippo, Heatran, great stuff like that. Scarf Jirachi, Gliscors. Anyway, before I get too nostalgic over that, this set was popular, Leech, Protect, Spore, Drain Punch, but overall it didn't wind up lasting. The defining feature of Gen 5 Leech Seed, of course, was Ferrothorn. At the beginning of the generation, everyone was freaking out. And in Black and White 1, because Ferrothorn was this, perfect Pokemon, and it also had Leech Seed, so, talk about offense while playing defense, especially with Iron Barbs. Ferrothorn is the offense while playing defense Pokemon. You switch it into a U-turn, it's like, enjoy losing your, U-turn health. So, the only problem with Leech Seed in Black and White 1 was you could not run all three of Rock, Spikes, and Leech. You had to pick two. Not like that was really a problem in general, but especially because Ferrothorn liked running both stabs. Or Protect. But yeah, Leech Seed absolutely everywhere. And then in Black and White 2, you could finally run all three on the same set. But most popular was running Spikes on it, and then Leech Seed, and then Protector, Gyro Ball. And yeah, it was... Leech, Protect, Ferrothorn is ridiculous. And if you have followed Black and White at all in like the last half decade or so, you're like, hey, why don't I see this move anymore? Well, The reason is that Ferrothorn took Leech Seeding to such highs that pretty much the only thing that could switch into Leech Seed safely was other Ferrothorn. And this is on offensive rain teams. Ferrothorn is so good against other rain that you can pretty much only safely switch into its Leech Protect combo with your own Ferrothorn. And then, of course, what? They just PP stall each other until you can try to maneuver something else in that doesn't get leeched on the switch. Oh, it's nightmarish. I mean, even Sand teams had this issue, like pivoting Encore Alakazam into Leech Seed so you could then Encore it into Leech and force it out. But yeah, more on Zam and Magikarp in a second. But yeah, basically you had, this thing Leech Seeds everything in the game pretty much except itself, and so what wound up happening is that it's so busted switching into this monstrosity that on offensive rain teams you run knockoff on Ferrothorn. This surprisingly didn't become a real popular thing until 2016 or so, and these Ferrothorns would exchange knockoffs because nothing else could switch into Ferrothorn. You would pretty much just weaken each other and waste PP, and then start spamming spikes, and then eventually someone is going to try and pivot in their Tentacruel or whatever on the spike against the lefties less Ferrothorn. I mean, it got to the point where you wouldn't even run lefties on your Ferrothorn anymore in favor of running things like Lumberry or Rostberry to, especially with an adamant nature, to shrug off a burn from Rotom Wash and then power whip it and destroy it for the benefit of your rain team. But it got to the point where you weren't even running lefties anymore because you would so consistently find yourself engaged in knockoff wars with other Ferrothorn. And I mean, you would still run lefties sometimes just because you didn't want to get punished necessarily. You would never assume that the other Ferrothorn wouldn't run lefties and just be like, oh, I'm fine against it because I'll wear it down. No, it's pretty much out of necessity that these Ferrothorns have adopted. You pretty much ditch Leech Seed. Leech Seed was really a victim of its own success because Ferrothorn was pretty much like, okay, I'm the only thing that can counter myself on rain teams. And as for Sand teams, those wound up being so irritated by passive damage anyway. I mean, it's not enough to go standard defense, longevity, Heatran, Hippo, Gliscor type stuff. No, you need to go full Magic Guard with Reuniclus. And when you're going Reuniclus, then that obviously doesn't care about Leech Seed. And Ferrothorn's like, well, instead of, if I'm facing Rain, then I'm just going to Thud with my Leech into other Ferro. If I'm facing Sand, then I'm just going to Thud into, even stuff like Skarmory that's going to roost it off and stall it out. Because those teams are supposed to go the distance. But Reuniclus too is just going to Leech it or absorb it uselessly, so I'm going to run knockoff and at least get rid of that Reuniclus's lefties, which is big because Reuniclus is such a threat. And not to say you still can't use Leech on Ferro. It's obviously an amazing move against everything else. The problem is that now it's harder to fit. Leech Seed is so good that the metagame adapted so hard against it that it winds up being kind of useless. And so if you are going to run Leech Ferro, you can't run rocks on it. And most of the time on Ferro was most common on rain offense, and there you are going to run rocks on it because it's just most efficient, and you aren't going to be running other Pokemon that can rock too often. I mean, yeah, you can run Mamoswine, but you want to be attacking with Mamoswine. You don't want to be relying on it as your rocker, especially into Tentacruel. That's ugly. I mean, Garchomp feasibly, but again, now you're getting specific. Now, if you're running Ferrothorn on Sand, then it's a lot more feasible because there's a million other rockers there. And there, yes, you actually would want to run Leech Seed because there it is a lot more of a pain. And if you're going to run, if you want, you could just Leech Seed everything else. And then if Reuniclus comes in to block you, okay, well, Reuniclus, say goodbye to your leftovers. And that is great. But you can't really afford that if you're running Ferrothorn on rain offense because you can't afford rocks, spikes, knockoff, and Leech Seed. You can't go attackless. So unfortunately. So yeah, Leech Seed is still a great move, but you really need to have knockoff to make the most of it. Otherwise, it just doesn't really wind up going anywhere. Yes, keep watching, please. So, and what's hilarious is that this thing I just described in Gen 5, the same exact thing happened in Gen 6, where originally it was Leech Protect. Where it was Leech Protect spikes, power whip. At first people weren't even using spikes because, defog, why use spikes? And then people realized that was stupid. But afterwards you realize, oh, leech, spikes, protect, power whip, oh my god. And then people were countering Ferrothorn with Ferrothorn again. We even had an SPL game where one Ferrothorn used HP Fire, and then people realized, oh, knockoff does this but a million times better, and also does things like ruin Lefty's Heatran. So HP Fire Ferrothorn is legit, but in Gen 7 for Kartana. Now, and so it's the same exact thing. You want to run Leech Protect Ferrothorn because it's the most unfair, busted piece of nonsense ever, but you can't because otherwise other Ferrothorn are just going to ruin you. Or you're going to get blanked by Magic Guard stuff. And I mean, here now in Gen 6, the Magic Guard thing really takes off because of Clefable becoming absolutely insane. So you got to... If you want to Leech, you can, but, I mean, what are you going to do? Leech Protect knockoff attacking move? I mean, if you think you can get away with attackless Pharaoh, then sure, go for it. But, then there's other moves you would want to run. Because basically, the response to the hazard stacking that Ferrothorn was such an instrumental part of was either you go super, super fast, or more often, you go super, super slow, and you don't run these mid-range teams. Because the mid-range teams are the ones that most suffer from Leech Seed. Those are the ones most taken advantage of by Ferrothorn spiking and leeching everything in sight. You want to go with the slow teams who are, the Magic Garters, the Poison Heal Gliscors, the Roost Skarmories, the Roost Megaladios. Those are kinds of things that are meant to go the distance, and those are the ones that you can't just Leech Protect against because those are just going to sit on you long term anyway. They're not afraid of the spikes, so they can switch around more, as opposed to teams that aren't as robust against spikes. Where, because against those teams you can Leech Protect freely because the more they switch around Leech Seed, the more they're getting worn down in a way that they don't have the longevity to deal with. But here you gotta have knockoff to accentuate it. So basically Leech Protect was too strong for its own good. Hilariously enough. So, yeah, same thing happened in Gen 6. And still a great Pokemon, but you can't protect... I mean, not that knockoff isn't an amazing move anyway. And if you want to fit other moves here, you like fitting Worry Seed, because that absolutely ruins Gliscor's Poison Heal. So you can potentially turn its Poison Heal against it, and you can even mess with Magic Guard Reuniclus that way. And Clefable, of course. But you really got to be careful about it. And, yeah. And I never liked dropping Power Whip and going Mono Gyro Ball, or, Iron Head if you want PP against Clef. But, it's feasible. But, yeah, the Leech Protect Pharaoh, too good for its own, good. So, then Gen 7, similar things happen. But Pharaoh's also trying to fit in other moves, like Gyro for the Tapus and Magearna, or HP Fire, like mentioned, for Celesteela. But Ferrothorn now has a great new partner in spamming Leech Seed, and it's a Pokemon that's kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years because it gets ruined by Kartana's knockoff, and Kartana's so crazy busted that people go, well, if you run Celesteela, you've got this Kartana check that actually needs another Kartana check alongside it. But it's still such a great Pokemon. I hope people start using it again. And so you could run these amazing teams with double Leech Seed. And this isn't even a grass type. I mean, because, yeah, theoretically you could have done double Leech Seed before. But it would mean doubling up on Leech. Now you've got basically a Skarmory that Leech Seeds. And with Flamethrower, you're not blocking it with Ferrothorn. And with Stab Heavy Slam, then you're not blocking it with Clefable either. Obviously, Reuniclus did become popular in Gen 7 as well, so you gotta really take that into account. But I mean, it's nothing that you can't handle with, say, a Pursuit, Mega T-Tar, or CB Tar, or whatever. Or just, a strategy based on dealing with Reuniclus somehow. But yeah, Leech Protect, Heavy Slam, Flamethrower, it's a classic, whether you go physical defense or special defense. It's a great Pokemon, and very spammable. People were calling Celesteela busted in early Gen 7, which was hilarious. But yeah, such a great Pokemon, and things like Tapu Lele and Tapu Bulu, and just Leech Seeding the devil out of everything. I mean, again, the Heatran principle. Oh, my Heatran stops it, but, I switch into Leech with Rocks Up, and I'm Z Heatran, so I don't even have lefties, and yeah, it gets very ugly very quickly. These two will wear you down quickly, and they were really breathing a lot of life into Gen 7 defense. Now, obviously, you can't go all in on this, but it helps to have 16 Leech Seeds. Or sorry, helps to have 32 Leech Seeds instead of 16. But again, with teams that can go the distance, you can't go all the way. But it's really great because I remember I had some teams I really loved with Pharaoh and Celesteela, and it was wonderful because I was facing these very fast-paced offensive teams. and I was still able to withstand them defensively and then strike back with offense in return. Now, and I think the emphasis, I was able to run Leech Protect Pharaoh more often because it was not as centralized around Ferrothorn as Gen 5 and 6 got. So you didn't need to worry about other Ferrothorn blanking you as hard. I think I had other methods of dealing with Pharaoh if it did pop up. But I think I also didn't run knockoff at some points. Because, I don't know. Basically, it was more flexible. And obviously you could run, Spikes Greninja and then just drop spikes on Pharaoh in general, which is not something you would always want to do. But basically you had more flexibility in Gen 7, so I appreciated that. And I mean, the most popular grass types in Bulu and Kartana, they're not going to... I guess you would want Gyro Ball more in Pharaoh so you don't get blanked by Bulu, but I mean, it's not going to want to switch into Steela either. And also you can spike against them, so you don't really mind. And yeah, Kartana obviously not switching in here either. So yeah, I think that's... Oh, how am I forgetting Superior? Oh my god. Which became a huge pain in Gen 6 already. With Sub, Leech Seed, Leaf Storm, and then either HP Fire or Glare. And this became especially... I mean, okay, the thing about Superior is that people realize its strongest non-Leaf Storm move wasn't Leech Seed, it was Glare. And so they were running all kinds of goofy stuff. And, I mean, it also had a lot of moves in sets like in Gen 6. I really liked Assault Vest. And you could run... I thought that set was really, really good. But in Gen 7, you could also run Z moves, or Z Grass, for example. I think some people ran like Z Nature Power, but Z Grass was just utterly ridiculous with Leaf Storm. And then you even ran like Synthesis and stuff on it. But yeah, Leech Seed, obviously an amazing move on this. And I mean... You switch a Heatran into a Subseed Superior, and you are in a world of hurt. I mean, if you're trying to hit Magma Storms against the subbing Superior, then you've lost. It's that simple. It makes a good case for Lava Plume. One of many good cases, obviously. But yeah, Subseed Superior was very good at bringing a more fast-paced offensive slant to the Leech Seed game, because it generally does get associated with slow Pokemon. But yeah, it's the go-to Pokemon for fast-paced Leech Seed, where the Pokemon you're switching into it are slower than it, and that makes dealing with it so much more obnoxious. I mean, yeah, you switch your Mega Charizard Y into it, and you subs, and then you Leech Seeds, and it subs a bunch more, and eventually you have to Roost, and then it's bombarding you with, yeah, okay, Leaf Storm Quad resisted, it's weak, whatever, but you're doing that sub thing all over again, and with hazards, it just gets so ugly so fast, and you don't even have to go slow and bulky to get hazards with it, because you can pair Superior with Greninja, and it makes for some very, very effective indirect damage, but with fast Pokemon pacings. Kind of like a Quick Stall, which was exclusively an Uber's thing in something like Gen 4, because you didn't really have an equivalent to Skyman, because Skyman was so much faster than everything else. You couldn't replicate that with, Land Shaman. So, yeah, I think that's basically it. I forgot Mega Venusaur, too. Leech Seed Mega Venusaur. I mean, the thing is that 3 attacks Mega Venusaur is generally the more reliable form in Gen 6. So you don't really need it. I mean, you could use it in Gen 6 for sure. It's still going to be a good Pokemon. But in Gen 7, I think you're a lot happier with running Leech Seed on it, just to completely, just to, wear down things like Heatran more effectively. Although you do sometimes miss Giga Drain's coverage. But Leech, Sludge Bomb, HP Fire for Synthesis, for example, is just phenomenal. And it's nice to run Leech, Giga, Synthesis, Sludge Bomb, or usually Sludge Bomb. But Leech, Giga, Synthesis is nice just because it's good to not have to rely entirely on Synthesis for recovery, because, again, it's a Mega Stone, so it doesn't really rely on... So it can't run Black Sludge, for example. And Giga Drain helps, but obviously if you can Leech Seed, then it's just ideal. Obviously, this is a luxury. Most of the time you are going to want to run HP Fire to deal with things like Kartana and Mega Mawile in particular. But, if you pair it with a Magnezone or something, then you can definitely pull some team building strings. I mean, Mega Venusaur and Celesteela was also an amazing combination on a lot of teams. So, there's a lot of reliability there. And you could also run you did like running the double Leech Seed. It's so nice how there were 2 different pairs of double Leech Seed that you could run along with Celesteela, whether with Ferrothorn or Mega Vena. So, yeah, Venusaur, I always think needs more love. It's perpetually underrated somehow. And obviously you can run knockoff with it. You can do it with Superior too. Get rid of the lefties on that Heatran, and yeah, and here you have a stab sludge bomb, so Clef doesn't want to deal with it. Superior, obviously you don't want to be launching Clef into those boosting Leaf Storms. So yeah, Mega Venusaur, very very underrated. And obviously it comes with that wonderful benefit of absorbing Toxapex's Toxic Spikes. So I think that's basically it. I am not much of a Gen 8 expert, but obviously I know Ferrothorn is very good there. I think Celesteela is pretty good there. Oh, it's UU, I guess. Not as good as I thought. I know Superior. Oh, Superior is Nat Dex. Never mind. It just got re-released in Gen 9. That's what I'm thinking of. I know Ferrothorn is good there, but there's also like lots of Clefs and lots of longevity. But then again, you can take advantage of that. You remove Boots with knockoff. But generally, I did not see very much Leech Seed in Gen 9. It was more like the Rillaboom running around, stuff like that. But yeah, I'm going to stop there. And from what I have observed of Gen 9, admittedly limited, then I have not seen much there either. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I am a huge, huge fan of Leech Seed, and I enjoyed getting to tell you about its intricacies for these last 50 minutes. So, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one.